Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, Velocities in Music, the best kept secret in music reviews. A couple years ago, 2010, end of 2010, an artist we reviewed kind of on the fly really took a hold of our attention, and we really kind of fell in love with her debut album. That person is Glasser, her stage name. Her actual name is Cameron Mesirow, and her first album was entitled Ring. 3 years later, she's coming out with her second album, Interiors. So to describe Glasser's sound, I would call it indie electronica meets experimental electronica. It's very experimental in nature. It's progressive. She's trying to create these sonic experiences using mainly electronic elements and her beautiful voice to create these dark landscapes where she, plays with dynamics and plays with different synth textures and electronic melodies, and to create just a very dynamically contrasted, colorful landscape in soundscape. And I mean, we really fell in love with Ring just for that reason. Plus, she did a lot of really cool things with albumization. That record was a solid album. It flowed well. It tied together very well. And I think that we were just really excited to see where she went with that sound. 3 years later, we get Interiors. And Tom, how would you describe the difference in sound here? How did she change from Ring to Interiors?
To me, one big thing, which it'll come out of the gate sounding like a complaint, which it kind of is, but much less dynamics on this album. Yep. It's a lot more even-keeled. You also think about the fact that this album is 12 tracks. Ring was 9. Now, Ring actually, each track kind of felt like 2 tracks at sometimes because there were kind of outros and separate sections, which actually she does a lot here as well on several of the songs. They have these kind of disconnected outros that just kind of finish the track off before moving on to something else. That was a big difference to me. Also, just the intensity wasn't quite there as much. Yeah. In fact, I feel like I can't really keep saying what I'm saying without just coming out and making it clear that I was a little disappointed in this album. I significantly liked Ring better than this one by a fairly large margin, and it was really because of those reasons. I mean, the thing that drew me in about Ring wasn't the hooks. It wasn't vocal hooks. It wasn't what that album was about. Because it
was about mood.
Exactly. And here's the way she did it. She did it by building tension in the beats and the electronic melodies, and then providing intensity with her vocals and letting it build. You listen to the first track on Ring, Apply, and the way it builds, the way that those instrumentals just keep rolling on themselves and building in loudness and intensity, and then the vocals are just kind of shrieking by the end. Wow, really took hold of me. You don't get anything like that here. You don't get the intensity in the vocals. There still aren't really many hooks, which, like I said, is okay as long as you're doing something to draw me in, but that spark just wasn't really there. There wasn't really anything that made this experience memorable or really effective to me.
Yeah, and first of all, I think you hit the nail on the head. The vocals simply aren't gripping enough. She does not emote nearly as much as she did on the previous record. She also does not crank up her intensity, and she doesn't ever speak softly or really belt it out at any point on this album. It's all kind of in that middle range. Now, her voice and her vocal parts are very good. She always does a good job writing vocal parts and presenting them. I mean, she has a beautiful voice, as I've said. I could just listen to this girl sing all day long. It just works. And against the sonic backdrop that she's creating, it's a nice sound. Now, this album is, I wouldn't go as far to say it's not moody, it's just less moody than Ring. And I think that because of that, it's more experimental. She is reaching on a lot of these tracks to take this in a different direction. She's playing with her sound, seeing what she can do with it. I could not help but keep thinking Kate Bush on this album. Where on the first album, I didn't feel that way quite as much. I didn't feel like she was really experimenting and trying to make something that's equally as artistic as it is musical. And this is just way more weighted towards art. She's experimenting. She's painting with sound.
Artistic is the key word. And especially just look at the track titles and the album title, Interiors, and you've got shape, design, landscape, forge.
Well, it was inspired by New York City architecture,
which completely makes sense. And that's what she's trying to do with the sound, which I really appreciate. And that's what makes reviews like this such a struggle for me, because I can listen to it
and go, that's a great idea.
Yeah, I can listen to it from an intellectual standpoint and love what she's doing artistically.
Absolutely.
I have a great appreciation for it, but I just don't really care about that as much if it doesn't have an emotional and a gripping effect on me.
Hey, Tom, 4 years into this, good news. The scores don't matter.
Yeah.
Key for you guys, the scores, they don't mean anything. This is just made up on the spot. We really care about what the experience was when listening to the album. We're about the album listening experience, not the songs, not a collection of songs. It's about the album. They put out records for a reason. What is the reason? And I think Glasser's reason for making Interiors was that intellectual approach. She wanted to take her music to the next level, and she did it by experimenting with songwriting, song structure, ideas, lyrics, names of songs, that sort of thing. Now, she comes from a very musical family. Her father was a member of the, I think, German or Berlin Blue Man Group.
Yeah.
And her mother was in post-punk band or something like that. I don't really know much of the details, but coming from a musical background like this guy right here, you are just overflowing with ideas, and the way that you get these ideas onto paper is by just doing it, and that's what I respect about Glasser. I'm still excited to see what she'll do in the future, and even though I didn't like this album nearly as much as Ring, for all the reason Tom says, I did appreciate a lot of the things that she was doing. A lot of the moods on this album are quite nice. There's a lot of just cool ideas she presents. Now, I will say this. For as experimental as this album was intended to be, the ideas get stale by the end.
Yeah.
It's almost like this album is either too long or she didn't experiment enough and keep that variety going.
Yeah.
And there's some details in there as to like chord progressions and just the general mood and sound that she's going for. A lot of it has to do with the vocal presence and not really projecting and really making her vocal super intense or that dynamic contrast. But it just gets a little stale towards the end. Especially I think there's a sag in the middle, I'd say.
Yeah, definitely.
But overall, I would say that this still has some redeeming qualities. Tom, what are you going?
I'm going 65.
So I'm a little bit higher than you, a little bit of a disagreement here, 71, which puts us in the upper 60s. Upper 60s for us, because the scores don't matter, is just what we would describe this album as something that we would recommend if you're into indie electronica, if you're into albums that are experimental in nature and like female vocalists with just beautiful voices. If that's something that interests you, I would recommend checking out Interiors. If it's not your cup of tea, that's fine. We did warn you. It's going to be a little bit polarizing, and if you fell in love with Ring, it's definitely probably not going to trip your trigger quite as much as that album did. Please let us know your thoughts at www.velocitiesandmusic.com or youtube.com/velocitiesandmusic. As always, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and let us know what albums you'd like to see us review on this channel. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, moving music critique forward.
I follow